we'll start with Jonathan Brooks because Fozzy, you played with the Carolina Panthers. I'm sure you pay attention to what the Panthers, they've been through some ups and downs with new ownership. Matt Rule came and went. What is Jonathan Brooks and Jatavian Sanders walking into there in Carolina?
Yeah, I think ultimately, whenever you look at the situation that's presented itself, Carolina was not a good football team a season ago. Obviously, they had basically a fire sale with the old GM and head coach that was put into place. You got a new face, new regime being able to start it. GM Dan Morgan, who's a lifetime Panther, very well received from the Panther community. Then you bring in young Dave Canales, who was at Tampa Bay a season ago. Uh, Upstart to why Baker Mayfield had the season that he had a season ago. And I think pairing those two guys with Bryce Young gives him the opportunity to have more success this year. And then you bring in some incoming talent, right? You look at what the Panthers did, not even just between JB and JT, but going to go get Xavier from South Carolina to add on to that, help bolster up the defense as well, man. It puts this offense in a good spot to be able to add key pieces like a top wide receiver, the top running back, and then one of the best tight end mismatches that you could find in the draft. And I feel like they got a really good steal by getting Jatavian Sanders in the 4th round. Him being available at that point in time, I think works out phenomenal for Bryce Young. And if you go back and look at some of the stats, the Panthers were terrible at implementing their tight ends and putting their tight ends in a good position to be able to win, especially on 3rd downs. And that's where Carolina typically has been good, is whenever they have a good tight end and be able to rely on them 3rd down. So I think it's been a really good pickup for JB and JT to go there, and I think they can make an immediate impact, especially once JB is 100% healthy.
Yeah, Fozzy, how do you think Jonathan Brooks' process on just getting back to being 100%, how do you think that's going to go? Because I know this first year it might be tough for him, but I know in that second year, usually guys, they feel more like themselves because they've had a full year to heal. But I think the Panthers, like they should, if he's cleared, throw him in there. Like, he's that good, he's that worth it. But do you think it might take a little bit for him to get back to his full self?
I think there's an adjustment period that'll happen between JB, and not necessarily from the standpoint of the knee or feeling like he got to be fully back to himself, but more the transition period going from college to the NFL ranks. And that's what every rookie has to go through. And then you also got to prepare for 18 weeks in the NFL, right? 17 games, 1 bye week. And that's not including preseason or postseason if you're fortunate enough to make it through the postseason. So that's going to be the biggest transition, is how JB is preparing now. I've had several talks with him. The longest one that I had with him was during Pro Day, being able to see where he was on that recovery process and the journey that he went on. He and I kind of have similar pathways of, not finishing our career, having a knee injury, and then not being able to participate in the NFL Combine or Pro Day. But obviously, JB's future is very bright, being able to be the first running back selected in the NFL draft in the 2nd round and going to an organization like the Panthers, who really want to stress running the ball with a good amount of pieces that they have around him. I think JB will be just fine. It's just going to be transition into the speed of the game and then the length of the season, considering he kind of has to feel his way and work his way through this offseason until he's completely healthy. But I think once he's healthy, he'll be able to provide that immediate impact. And with technology nowadays, the ACL, it seems like it's really only 6 months that max that you're missing if you don't have any other structural damage. So I think JB is in good hands with who he's been able to see from the doctor's perspective, and then the work that he's put in. I've seen him continue to be a hard worker. I think that's going to translate well for him to have success whenever he's ready.
Talking to Fozzy Whittaker, and Fozzy, definitely want to we'll get back to the NFL draft, but I want to get your thoughts on these Longhorns coming out of spring football. You have done an amazing job with Longhorn Network, and all the coverage, but let's start with the offense, and we'll start at your position, running back. Mm-hmm. What stood out to you about the running back position for Texas this spring.
Yeah. And first off, before I go into the running back position, I want to say thank you to everybody a part of Longhorn Network that allowed me to be in this position, talking with you guys today, being able to cover the spring game. That was just my second time in the booth, man. I had an absolute blast. It's been a phenomenal run for those associated with Longhorn Network, and I'm just extremely appreciative for them allowing me to walk in with open arms and be able to share some of the information that I was able to obtain. So with that being said, I thought the running backs over the course of the entire spring, not just in the spring game, but I thought, from week 1 all the way until that last week and that last scrimmage before, the actual spring game took place, the running backs had something to prove. And you look at C4 is what coach always calls Cedric Baxter, just because he's so explosive and dynamic in the way that he's able to, set the defense up, being able to run the ball, tote the rock, and then obviously a healthy dose of Jaden Blue in there as well is that 1-2 punch is going to be really electric. And I can say from my own mindset and the conversations that I had with Jaden Blue is he's taking the next step. And he's ready to burst on the scene in a big way, not just from a standpoint of his athletic gifts, right? We've seen what he can do athletically. But if you go and look at his mentality, like this year, I've gotten even closer with it, having spent that time. He's ready to be more of a leader. He's ready to take on what it means to be in that leadership role in the same way that Jonathan Brooks was, and Roshan Johnson and Bijan Robinson. And it's a healthy leadership between he and Cedric Baxter. And I think that's the reason why the health of the running back room is really, really good and in good hands. Now, you can't get no further of talking about the running backs without talking about the running back coach himself, right? This is Tashard Choice, who's been absolutely on fire since he set his foot into the coaching ranks. Whenever he even started with the Mean Green, whenever he started, obviously, at Georgia Tech. Now he's starting his own presence being felt here at the University of Texas. 4 running backs in the last 2 drafts. First running back off of the board in both of these last 2 drafts. And that just signifies, hey, if you're a starter, you're probably going to get picked highly in the upcoming draft with the production that you have from Coach Choice and Coach Sark being able to call the plays. But not even if you're a starter, but even if you are a backup guy, you got a good potential or good possibility to be able to get picked up in the draft as the history has shown in these past 2 years what can be done from a development standpoint. And I think CJ Baxter and Jaden Blue are the next 2 to be able to burst on the scene. But right behind them, man, you got people chomping at the bit. Trey Weisner had an unbelievable spring practice this year. He got more reps with the 1s from what I was able to see, got reps with the 2s as well. But he's not just a special teams player. That kind of was his role a season ago. But this year, I can see him getting on the field and finding a way to get into the rotation, similar to the way that Keelan Robinson was able to get in with JB and Cedric Baxter and Blue a season ago. So Trey Weisner, I expect some big things happening from his way as well. And then you bring in the 2 young running backs, Jared Gibson and Christian Clark, and they look like creative players. They're supposed to be going to go graduate high school in a couple of weeks, and, man, they look like they are already like sophomores in college. It's crazy how developed they are, their maturity level as well, and they'll continue to grow, right? They're freshmen, so they're still learning and understanding what it means to be a collegiate athlete and a student athlete at that, with their first semester in college as well. So I think the running back room is in very, very good hands right now.
Well, real quick, what do you like most about Trey Weisner?
Trey Weisner, it's funny because he's not necessarily the fastest guy. He's not the biggest guy. He's not the strongest guy, but he does everything exceptionally well. And he's slippery. He kind of has that rangy movement similar to Jamal Charles, right? He's not necessarily the same speed as Jamal, but if you go back and watch some of Jamal's tape whenever he was at Texas, he kind of had a long, rangy run about himself, even though Jamal is not a tall guy. Trey Weisner runs very similar to that from a stature of like a little bit of a long strider, finds a way to get the defense out of position and can make a subtle movement without necessarily having to chop his feet before he makes that cut. And so I think that's what makes it stand out to me. He's so smooth. And then he has great hands. And anytime they called plays where he's free release out of the backfield, he was making a huge impact and really making the defense pay. And then he's hungry. That's a guy, whenever you look at him every single time you're at practice, or if you cut on the tape and have an opportunity to see what he's doing, he's fighting for that extra yard against his own guys in spring, right? He's getting scrappy. He's trying to finish every single run. He runs all the way to the end zone whenever he touches the rock. So that's the type of personality and the type of person that you want to see get a chance, because whenever he does get a chance, he's one that will absolutely take advantage of it.
Yeah. Fozzy, who on this current roster can you see emerging as the leader? I mean, Jordan Whittington's off to the NFL. Jalen Ford's off to the NFL. Like, you had some big-time guys that were the voices of that locker room. Who do you think in 2024 is going to step up and be those guys for this ball club?
Yeah, that's a good point. Obviously, Quinn Ewers is going to be the focal point of where leadership begins and ends with this team, as a highly recruited player as he is, and one that's returning back with so much expectations on the line. He's going to have to continue to step up his leadership roles, and I thought he did a phenomenal job with that this past season. And I think this year he has another opportunity to take another step forward. But Jonte Cook, that's a guy in the receiver room that I think is really going to, number one, have a great season. He looks really good. Like, he looks poised. He looks ready to be in control of the run of the wide receiver room. I'm sorry. But he also has a demeanor about himself that he's not just a second year guy. He's kind of carrying himself like, okay, this is what X did before me. This is what J Witt did before me. This is what AD did before me. I'm going to continue to pick up the room. I'm going to continue to hold on to that legacy. I mean, we haven't had 3 receivers drafted in an NFL draft, and I don't know how long, in a modern era. And
right.
It's really cool to be able to see the development that Coach Sark has had with 2 different receiver coaches now. But Jonte Cook looked like he's ready to be able to fulfill some of the things that those guys left behind and take on that task. So I think Jonte Cook is going to be one on the offensive side that does that. CJ Baxter is another guy who is extremely wise beyond his age, right? If you talk to CJ Baxter, you'd be like, wait a minute, you just going into your second year? Wait, what do you mean you're not a senior? That's the way he carries himself. That's the mentality he has. He takes the ownership. I remember one practice, the running backs didn't necessarily fare so well throughout the course of practice, right? Whether it was, maybe missing a ball here, missing a read there or something. And at the end of practice, CJ Baxter is talking to all of them. He's like, hey, that's on me. I'm the leader of the room. We got to get this right. And so if that leadership becomes infectious, not just in the running back room, but across the entire team, I can see CJ Baxter being one of the guys that steps up in a big leadership role. Then on the flip side, right, same way, Anthony Hill, right in the center of the action, right? He's Mike linebacker a lot now, taking over the role that Jalen Ford left behind. He's had to be more vocal, and I think his playmaking abilities and what he can do physically and gifted and athletically, he gives you that same impression, right? Wait a minute, you was a freshman last year. How are you doing some of these things that you're doing? How are you making the calls and the checks that you're making from a pre-snap read perspective? But I've seen him continue to be vocal. I've seen him communicate with David Bender, who's been here for 5 years. I've seen him communicate with Maurice Blackwell, who's been here for several years before him as well. And I think Ant Hill's just ready to take that next step to become that true unsung leader. And then same way that Tavondre Sweat used to take hold of the defensive line, Alfred Collins, he stepped up in a very big way, right? There's a hole to fill between those 2 defensive tackles. If you got a guy that goes in the first round and another one that goes right after him to Tennessee, you got to feel that replacement and that production from some way. And I think Alfred Collins plans to do that, not just from a physical standpoint, but also from that leadership perspective that you're talking about.
Fozzy, from the receiver standpoint, it seems like, based on what Jordan Whittington said, that maybe DeAndre Moore is a candidate to be in the slot where Whittington was, but he sure looked good outside. Jonte Cook, like you said, thinks along the lines of Xavier Worthy. It looks like Isaiah Bond is also vying for that role that Worthy had. And Ryan Wingo looks like a guy who's vying for the role that A.D. Mitchell had, along with Matthew Golden. How do you see Sark dividing all this up and feeding all these mouths? And we don't even have Silas Bolden on campus yet.
Right.
He's probably another guy who's going to work the slot some too.
Yeah, I think it's a healthy conundrum to have, right? And here's what I go back to. If the people that kind of are worried about is there's only one ball, how will enough mouths get fed with so many hungry guys trying to be able to make a play and step up on the field? Sark's done this at whatever school he's been at. And you go back to his USC days, he had top flight receivers. You go back to his Washington days, had top flight receivers. You go back again whenever he was at Alabama, all right, he's had multiple top flight receivers. And then just this past year, that goes to show you 3 draft picks came from the receiver room. So he'll find a way to distribute the ball effectively and efficiently. Obviously, Quinn Ewers is, in my opinion, going to take another step up to be able to make that happen. But the spring game is also indicative of the depth that you need. There were 24 different receivers that caught a pass in the spring game. 24. Now, understand, everybody won't necessarily play in the spring game or in the season from where they did in the spring game. But if you can distribute the ball to that form and that capacity to that many people, right? DeAndre Moore had, I want to say, 3 catches. Jonte Cook had 4 catches. Isaiah Bond, I believe, had 4 catches himself. Ryan Wingo had 4 catches himself. Like, you can distribute it like that. You put the pressure on the defense in a major way. And not to mention, you talked about where some guys fit from a position standpoint or from a formation standpoint. Coach Sark is so multiple, man. He can move all these guys around, right? We saw Isaiah Bond as the X receiver. Then we saw him as the Z in the slot. Then we saw him as the Y receiver or the sub B or the F receiver, however you want to call it. We've seen Jonte Cook move around. We've seen DeAndre Moore outside and in the slot. So I think ultimately it's all about staying in rhythm, staying on pace, staying on beat. And that's what Coach Sark likes his quarterbacks to be in. And whenever Quinn Ewers gets in rhythm, man, he's willing and dealing to everybody on the field. Not to mention the tight ends will get involved in that passing game as well. So I think it's a good problem to have. You got so many talented guys. They should really be able to stress the defense as well as stay healthy, right? Continue to stay healthy, because not one guy has to take every single snap. You're going to have a healthy rotation between all of these top flight receivers. And I think that'll be big whenever you're trying to make that stretch down in week 10, week 11, week 13, preparing for championship time frame and preparing for college football playoffs if this Texas team is fortunate enough to do that.
Fozzy, are you worried about the defense any? I mean, obviously what Byron Murphy and Trevondre Sweat brought to the table, Jalen Ford, the list goes on. You had a lot of guys drafted on that defense this past year, and a few guys that you were probably going to rely on if they didn't transfer, like an Austin Jordan or like a Terrence Brooks. And now you're a little bit more slim, especially in that secondary. Do you think that they should stay where they're at or go in the transfer portal and make another move to have more depth?
That's always a question, right? With the transfer portal and the way the college football landscape is right now, you can always go find somebody in the portal. But I really like what Sark has done over these past couple of seasons from a development standpoint, right? You got guys, and if you take even just this current recruiting class that just came in, he recruited 5-6 switch type guys that could play corner, they can play the star, they can play safety. So you got multiple guys that can fulfill that role. Yes, losing Terrence Brooks, Austin Jordan to the transfer portal, that definitely hurts your depth, especially on the back end, where I feel like Texas is still trying to figure out their identity. But ultimately, I have faith in Coach Sark. I have faith in Coach PK. I got faith in Coach Terry Joseph, Blake Gideon to be able to find the solutions that need the answers, right? The showing in the spring game was not necessarily one that made me feel confident about the defensive play, considering a season ago, you lose to Washington kind of to the defense's Achilles heel with their pass game and not being able to defend the pass as well as at least I expected, right? And I'm sure their expectations are even higher than mine. So that's an area of concern that they probably addressed this spring. And obviously you see in the recruiting class how they plan to address and attack it. I think you trust in your recruitment, you trust in your development, you allow yourself to put the best players in the best positions to be able to be successful. And I think that's where ultimately this team is going to rely on, is being able to put those best players out there and then play as fast as possible. And not to mention Jahdae Barron, I think he's already a leader. I didn't mention him earlier because he's already in that leadership category, but I expect him to continue to mount up and have a really big year. And I don't know if he's going to play any other.
Nope. Did we lose you?
Yeah, we lost you, Fozzy.
Foz, I don't know what happened. You were rolling along, and then all of a sudden your sound cut out. Let's see.
He's muted.
Now you're muted. Now you're okay. Yeah. Now we got you.
I can't hear you all though.
Uh-oh.
Something's messing.
Can you hear us now?
Muted again.
Let's see.
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
Yeah, that was weird.
Never happened before.
We were rolling along there. Let's see.
All right, test. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we got you. Now we got you. Yeah, so you were just finishing up on the secondary. I'll go ahead, Fozzy.
All right, I'm good now. I couldn't hear you all. I don't know what happened. Man, technology is crazy. Technology is crazy.
Well, let me ask you about. I'll just finish up on the offense.
Yeah.
The tight end, Jatavian Sanders, moving on. What did you see from Amari Niblack, from Juan Davis? Those guys are kind of the move on the field, pass catching tight ends. Gunnar Helm, the more complete inline blocker. What did you see from the tight end position?
Yeah, again, this is a team that has that depth to be able to showcase who they really are. And you start with Gunnar Helm, who's been with the ones, who's been here for years as well, came in with JT, knows how to do everything, right? He can be in line, he can be flexed out. Excuse me. Man, it's going crazy today. What is happening? Thank you. But you see Gunnar Helm being able to be flexed out, scores a big touchdown against Iowa State late in that game to help seal the deal for Texas, showcasing his versatility as a blocker as well as a receiver. But, man, Juan Davis and Amari Niblack, they really create opportunities for Sark to be as creative as he wants to be at the tight end position. Amari Niblack, he came in looking like just a guy that, you see a prototypical tight end that you want to see, can stretch the field, can be physical, and then also have like the muscles to go along with it. That's Amari Niblack, like just your get off the bus first type of individual whenever you look at him. And then you actually get to watch him play and you see him in the practices and you're like, oh, okay, the billing fits the way that he looks. And he's very nimble, very smooth guy, like smooth runner, man. He does everything really well. Then you look at Juan Davis, right? I kind of see Juan Davis as a tweener, like between a true tight end size, but also a bigger wide receiver size because of how fast and how quick he is. Really good hands. I think that's a mismatch nightmare. If any linebacker is on Juan Davis one-on-one, I bet Coach Sark is probably licking his chops because Juan Davis has been able to put some people into some bad positions because of how fast he is, how good he runs his routes, then just being so nimble. So a combination of Gunnar Helm with Amari Niblack as well as Juan Davis, a healthy dosage of all three of those guys is in store. And I think one of them is poised to have a really big breakout season similar to what JT was able to do this past season.
Yeah. Fozzy, this offensive line, we know that this is probably Kelvin Banks last year. I'm already seeing 2025 mock drafts. And everyone that I've seen has him going in the top 5. Like, I've seen about 10 of them. Every single one has Kelvin Banks going in the top 5. But just the experience with this offensive line, which I think losing Christian Jones, that's going to be big because C. Jones was huge last year. Big reason why he got drafted. But do you think that Cam Williams is ready? And do you think this offensive line is going to take another step of being really good headed into the SEC?
I do think Cam Williams will be ready. I think this offensive line will be ready. It's not too many times that Texas has been able to return as many starters as they will be in basically 2 consecutive seasons, right? They last year, same crew came back, and you saw the production that they were able to put on display. And then this year, like you mentioned, you lose Christian Jones, but you still got the other 4 anchors that's been able to hold it down, and not to mention the depth behind them. I saw guys being able to get reps with the 1s, with the 2s, with the 3s, and all of them were rotating in different combination of lines, and just goes to show you how good this team really can be. And it's going to start with the trenches at the offensive and the defensive line positions. But Coach Flood has done a phenomenal job. Texas O-lineman being drafted is not something that you typically hear on a yearly basis. And I think the run that this Texas team is continue to prep on, with Christian Jones being at the forefront of that offensive line group, being able to get a draft pick, I think you're looking at an opportunity for not only Texas to continue down that trend, but to put other teams on alert in the SEC. Like, hey, this ain't Big 12. This is not a speed team. This is not a run and gun team. This is a physical team that's going to line up and get after you from the start of the game all the way to the very end. And I think ultimately the mentality that Coach Sark and Coach Flood have installed into this offensive line, including the addition of Cam Williams, who looks to be the apparent starter this year, they look like they're ready. They're ready for war. And it doesn't matter who they face, whether it's Alabama, whether it's Georgia, whether it's going to be Michigan early on in the season. I feel like they're going to carry a swagger and a confidence about themselves as if they're trying to win that Joe Moore Award. And speaking with Kelvin Banks before the spring game, that's one of their goals and their mission is to be able to win it. They've seen what it's looking like, right? They played against the previous Joe Moore Award in the bowl game last year in the Sugar Bowl. Then they're getting a chance to play against this year, the team that won it in 2022 in Michigan. So for them to be able to witness it and see it and know what it takes to get to that next step, I think ultimately that's what's going to give them that drive and that hunger to continue to be a really good offensive line, not just for their own sake, but for the team's sake as well.
Is there a guy coming up at tackle who you feel good about, knowing Kelvin Banks could be gone after this season?
You know, that's an interesting question because I think Joe Baker really not Joe Baker, Brandon Baker. Joe Baker is a buddy I know back in Carolina. Took me back to my old Joe Baker days. But Brandon Baker is a guy that whenever we talk with Steve Sarkisian early in the early recruiting period on signing day from California, he mentioned some of the similarities that he has with Kelvin Banks. And one of the things that Kelvin Banks is really good at is moving his feet and getting in position before the defenders have a chance to do their first move. And whenever you go back and look at Brandon Baker's film, he's one of the top tackles in the country, has played right and left. So he has the versatility to be kind of one of those swing tackles. I think ultimately he'll have a chance to be able to replace Kelvin Banks if the time presents itself, and get a year under his belt to be able to see what it's like playing against SEC competition as well. I mean, there's no better test than that with what they've been able to produce in the draft pretty much every single year. I think he has an opportunity to fight for it, but ultimately, man, it's the competition level that Sark has created at every position is what makes this team so good and what has put them above the developmental standards of where we've seen Texas in the past is because everybody's scratching and clawing to get on the field. And if you are not the best, like, you got to find a way to become the best if you want to see it. And so I think ultimately that competition, it breeds champions. And if they can continue to level up the playing field and continue to iron sharpen iron with each other in the practice, then you could potentially see guys continue to be drafted similar to what Alabama has been able to do over the past few decades, basically, is what it's come down to the past 15 years. You see Alabama draft pick, even our own rivals up across the Red River from us, right? They've produced draft pick after draft pick, whether it was offensive tackles or centers or whatever the case may be. And so Texas hasn't been able to showcase that at a high level as consistently as those guys. But with what Coach Flood and Coach Sark are doing, I think that tide is beginning to change.
Fozzy, last one for me. Appreciate you jumping on Chip and Zay here on Texas Sports Unfiltered. I want to hear your thoughts on Cam Newton. I feel like he's been in a lot of headlines this last year, some good, some bad. Obviously, we know what happened at the flag football event and stuff. But for somebody that was in the locker room with him, won a lot of games with him, what's your opinion on Cam Newton as a person, player, character, etc.?
Cam is my dog. I love Cam, man. Ace Boogie. That's what we call him. That's his nickname, Ace Boogie, man. That's my road dog. I got a funny story, and if you haven't heard it, then you may get a kick out of it. But whenever I first got to Carolina, it was during training camp in 2014. I was undrafted, or I was a undrafted free agent, but I had got released by the Browns after they picked up 2 running backs in the NFL draft. So I was kind of sitting around for the summer months, training, staying ready for an opportunity. Opportunity called where me and another guy went out to Carolina. They had a running back tear his ACL actually on the second day in a non-padded practice, non-contact, tear his ACL. So they're looking to fill that position. And so me and another guy, we work out against each other. And then they said, hey, one of y'all are going to get signed today. I was blessed and thankful enough to get signed. And literally the next day, I was in the cafeteria with Cam Newton. And so the first thing that the guy that was with me, who was showing me around, the player personnel guy, he introduces me to Cam. And he says, hey, Cam, his run back, Fozzy, just, signed on team. He's going to be with the team throughout the rest of training camp. And so Cam thought my name was Bobby. And so Cam gives a nickname to everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how long you've been on the team. It doesn't matter. He finds a nickname for you that is associated with you for your time in Carolina while y'all are together. And so ever since he thought my name was Bobby, he called me Boucher, like the water boy. So every single time he saw me. Now, obviously, I corrected him after the first time. He said, man, I thought your name was Bobby. I was like, no, it's Fozzy. He was like, well, I still got to call you Boucher because that's where we at now. So every single time he saw me, he always called me Boucher. And it's the funniest story that I get to tell of my first interaction ever meeting Cam was him calling me Bobby Boucher, basically the water boy from the movie. But that's who Cam is. Cam's very eccentric. He's a guy that wants everybody to feel comfortable. The way that he's able to bring a locker room together, to galvanize a locker room, man, with his charisma, his character, the way he's able to say a joke during crunch time to keep everybody light and loose and then locked in at the same time. I thought that's what made him so special and why he's one of the best quarterbacks that I've been able to play with and the best quarterback that Carolina has ever had at that organization. But it's also really cool seeing him, go into the media realm, right? And some of the gripes that people have about him, he's pushing back on the narrative that he can't say how he feels, the narrative that his opinion doesn't matter whenever, he's a guy that's a former NFL MVP. He's a guy that played in a Super Bowl. He's a guy that won a Heisman Trophy. He's a guy that's done basically everything that any quarterback would want to achieve. And he's done a lot of those things, checking off the boxes and hearing some of the ways that he breaks down the film, hearing some of the ways that he breaks down the play of quarterbacks or other players. To me, it's real insightful, and he has his own flair and his own spin to it, right? We all know Cam is different, right? He's his own player. He's his own guy. He's his own person. He got all sorts of hats to be able to showcase his repertoire, his skills to be able to dress. That's something that he's into, fashion guy. And you don't really see too many guys that are 6'6", 250 pounds looking like Cam Newton and then also pulling off the fashion stuff that he does. So he's just a unique individual, one of one. It truly is amazing. But ultimate dude, obviously, whenever he's one of your leaders, man, he goes to bat for you, sacrifices himself, puts everything on the line. If he messes up, man, he owns up to it. And then he shakes it off, pulls up on the next play. I got to be better. Hey, let's get it right here. So that's what you kind of want to see from a leader and a quarterback, and that's what Cam Newton was, and that's who he continues to be day in and day out, whether it's on his media show, whether it's on somebody else's media show. Cam is going to be Cam, and man, that's truly authentic, and that's all you can ask for, honestly.
Fozzy, that's great stuff, man. Really, really appreciate you taking some time for us. Continued success to you, my friend.
I appreciate that, man. Sorry for all of the technology snafus that we were having, sneezing, my allergies going crazy, but I appreciate you all having me on, and I always enjoy talking about the Horns with y'all.
Hey, appreciate it so much, and we'll definitely be in touch.
Absolutely.